Stone light is always smooth, even when you're not.
I'm really sorry about what just happened.
Oh, that's cool. I feel embarrassed.
Just a second.
Oh, man.
I hate headsets, and like I have one for when I'm driving, but you know, you put it on, you make your call, you take it off. It's when you're standing at Dunkin' Donuts or something like that, and there's that little blue light flashing in you. It's like, how special are you that you have to get that phone call in the next 5 seconds? It's like, just take the things off, please, or else. I have this dream of being able to do this en masse. I would absolutely love to find like a room full of bankers or something like that at some big meeting. You know, disconnect all their phones, connect up to all their headsets at once and go, I know where you hid the money. I just see who runs. Yeah, put that in there and just rattle their cage a bit. This is a new addition. While rummaging through Bob's phone and in his SMSs, we find some certain messages that get our interest. And these messages have a 5-digit number prefix. And judging by the content within the message, you could probably figure out what the device is. There are some things that should just not be wirelessly enabled. By default, according to the manufacturer, these devices are not discoverable, but who thought this was a good idea? Have you figured it out yet? A Bluetooth-enabled vibrator. It pairs with a cell phone, and as it receives these specially coded text messages, each character of the message creates a certain motion. Let's just get the innuendo out of the way. We're all good? Any suggestions? Okay. Basically, teledildonics, which is the study of like long-distance sex, seriously, they have not looked at security in a lot of cases. It's kind of terrifying. This is kind of an extreme example of a bad idea. But seriously though, think about it. If they haven't spent time thinking about security, they think that this is just a good idea for, you know, some sort of remote stimulation. What about if we're hijack Bob's phone and send messages on his behalf? Or if we're near enough to his wife, we can connect to the device directly and send messages ourselves. Does that count as a sexual assault? What implication does that have if, oh honey, thanks for sending me that message at 7 p.m. last night? I didn't send that. Well, think about it. What would that do to relationships? That could get really awkward, weird, and probably disastrous. You know? I'm just thinking from a purely technical standpoint, if it's reacting to the characters available in an SMS, what about non-printable characters, control characters, things like that? You know, is there the possibility for physical harm with something like this? I'm adding that to the previous slide. So buffer overflow. But this is actually something to consider. You know, we're moving into an era where we're on that really slick slope of the curve that this technology is showing up in, you know, all over the place. That should this be wirelessly enabled? Nobody seems to be asking that question. It might seem like a good idea, but you know, is it? Seriously, I would love if somebody could like front the cash to get one of these things. They ain't cheap. And shut up. No, but if something like this could show up at like a DEF CON Wireless Village or something like this, tear it apart, fuzz it, like see what the implications are of this. You know, I think it'd actually be very telling to see how this other new field has not thought about security. So, how do you stop Bluetooth threats in general? Just turn off Bluetooth. Like, how many of you use Bluetooth on a regular basis? How many of you find you have really crappy battery life when you do? So turn off the Bluetooth and you get better battery life. You know, if you're not using it, then just, you turn it off. Change the default pin if you can. Some new headsets you can actually plug into a USB and actually interact with them and change the pins. But in general, most headsets, it's a default. I like what Motorola has done where it's only discoverable and will accept connections when you've held down the button for a few seconds, and it puts it in discoverable mode for 60 seconds. If possible, limit access to what parts of the device, a connected device can get to. Does somebody need access to your phone book if you're just trying to exchange a business card, or to your SMSs or something like that? If you can limit exactly what they're capable of, you won't have nearly as much fear if somebody is using this. And just in general, consider the security implications of bringing these devices into a possibly secure environment. I know a lot of government and military has probably thought of this, but there's probably some companies that haven't. And hopefully talks like this will get some of that attention there. Let's go after his keys. Bob has one of those RFID prox cards for his office. Carries it on a lanyard, sitting on his belt, along with his the other side of it is his picture ID. If you really want an interesting talk, check out Johnny Long's No Tech Hacking. He has a whole section on being able to photograph and replicate those badges. How many of you actually use these at the office and have them accessible all the time? Right? How many of you know that a lot of those, if you haven't set them up in about the last 5 years, their legacy system can be easily cloned? Just a few of you. CQ.cx. Jonathan Westhughes built a neat device. This is actually just his first version. He's actually refined it beyond, but essentially what it is you push one button, wave it in front of an RFID tag, it copies the number, push the other button, emulates it, and reads it back. So I just go up and behind the boss, the head of the company, or the other person who has entire access to a building, the janitor, go, hey, how you doing? Good job, beep. I now have his key. I go up to the door, beep, it lets me in. What's that? Tiger Team kind of stuff. And suddenly, the boss is going into the office at 3 o'clock in the morning and rummaging around in the R&D department. Everything's going to track back to him. Now, this is where you need to have multiple factors of authentication. If you have a security guard standing there too that sees somebody he doesn't recognize using the boss's ID, they might actually stop them, provided it's not just some little minimum wage job where it's there for show. Traditional keys are vulnerable too, because a lot of people will have their RFID badge, they'll have their ID badge, and the lanyard with all the keys on it. Photographing these keys, if you can do it surreptitiously, can actually reveal what the bidding is and how to replicate these keys. If you know the kind of lock that's in the door, if it's a Schlagweiser, Kwikset, or higher end or whatever, you can actually photograph and see the bidding, the bumps on the key, and know what the code is for that door. This gets really interesting when you start involving things like, safety of democracy, with the Diebold now, what the heck's their new name? Mouses. Premier Election Systems, that's what it is. They got caught with their pants down a couple of years ago where through their online store you could order additional keys for the Diebold machines. But this is the actual photo. That's the actual bidding of every key for every machine out there. And it was on their web store. So what happened was this guy saw this and he's like, I recognize those keys. That's the same as what we used to use at the mini bars in the hotel I used to work at. I might have a few blanks around. Gets the blanks, takes a look at this bidding, gets out a file, files down to what he thinks is the approximation, sends it to some of these guys doing audits on these machines, and lo and behold, is that working? I have all sorts of fun videos here. This is a key that not from Diebold, hand cut, first try. That's the memory card access slot that gets access to the memory card that stores all the votes. So, Bob's passport. Bob travels internationally a lot. There's some implications, particularly if he's got the new RFID passports, which have this little logo on them. How many of you have those? Right? Most of you, a few of you. You will, basically, there's no way to not get one in the near future because they're federally mandated. It's the new design. the encryption on these things is not very strong. They're also very easily read. The tinfoil hat solution that they came up with, because when they put these out for like a request for comments, there's like 2,000 comments all against and like 2 for it. So what their compromise was, okay, we'll still have the RFID, but we'll put a metal foil layer in the front and back cover. Now, this seems like a good idea, except that it's self-defeating. I don't know if you can see, but down in the corner, the passport with the metal foil in it naturally wants to pop open about an inch, which is enough to read the data from it. So their tinfoil hat actually is self-defeating because it increases the stiffness in the cover, and it naturally wants to pop open. So, and I'm gonna just run that video once again, and you can see he pushes it down, the data stream stops. Now it's reading, stops. And it starts reading, and he pushes it down again and it stops. So if you've got this thing in a purse or a loose pocket or something like that, the whole point of the tag of the tinfoil hat to not be able to be read, to have the passport not be able to be read until it's actually presented at a border, is negated. There's all sorts of implications and conspiracy theories about the RFID and the passports. You have to admit, there's a very short range on these things. So it's not like somebody's going to be reading, you know, across this room sort of thing. It'd have to be right next to you. The encryption could be better. They say it's a fairly long key, except that they're using factors like the passport number, which are sequential, birth dates, which there's a very limited key space, and other bits of information that you can really narrow down the available amount of key space on these things. The other thing that is of interest, I've actually talked to the #2 man in charge of passports with the US State Department. There is actually no rule that says if your RFID-enabled passport's RFID chip doesn't work, that they have to refuse you access to the border. You'll get increased scrutiny, but it is still a valid legal document for, was it 10 years down here? Canada, it's 5. For 10 years, that passport is still good, even if the RFID doesn't work. So liberal application of a hammer, you know, can negate a lot of the possible issues with this.
Willfully damaging it is a felony.
I fell really hard. Yeah. The other thing is that the other conspiracy theory is that, you know, oh, they'll be able to pick Americans out of a crowd for suicide bombings and stuff like this. And if anybody's ever traveled internationally to odd corners of the world, you'll generally find that most Westerners tend to stick out like a sore thumb. So I don't need to see your passport to know that, yeah, you're probably not from around here. So Bob has other duties, like probably a lot of other salesmen. He works trade shows. Bob's sales depend on demos being available, working properly, showing that, you know, how wonderful they are. What happens if you have widgets that are, you know, wirelessly controlled with unauthenticated, unencrypted commands? Don't try this at home, because these guys actually got banned.
Motorola's focus is about making sure that we deliver devices for the consumer.
Try that again.
Motorola's focus is about Motorola's focus is about making sure that we deliver devices for the consumer. And you can just wait a moment, because I think some of the screens have just gone down. So this is where we've been on Dancing Girls to keep you entertained for a few minutes while we just get things together.